start off, I removed all of the body parts from the sprues and then cleaned up all of the tabs that connected the parts to the sprues themselves by cutting those closely to the plastic of the part and then sanding it smooth with a sanding stick. By using the conversion kit from Plamos to turn this into a facelifted model, I need to change out the grills in the front bumper, and in order to make them fit I need to cut a couple of holes, as these are a bit deeper than the standard ones and also have a bit more detail to go behind them than the standard ones. Once the main bulk of the material was removed, I did a quick test fit with the grills and both fit in perfectly fine. A bit more cleanup was done afterwards with a sanding stick and some knives just to make it a bit more presentable, and then also needed to remove a bit on the body itself for some other parts to be added to that later on. I had a quick look through the instructions and noticed that both the front and rear bumper could be glued on before painting, so of course I'm doing that here, as that's a lot easier to do before than afterwards, as afterwards the risk of spilling some glue on the paint is a lot higher and the cleanup is a lot harder. Once those were in place, the glue was set, I could move on to sanding the entire body with some 600 grit sanding sponges and then getting it cleaned off before primer. Now normally for my plastic models I would be using some Zero Paint Spray Primer, as that is specifically for plastic. Now in this case, since the rear bumper is not plastic but resin, I'm using the Tamiya primer, which is both good for plastic and resin and also good for metal. So that's just to be sure that I won't be peeling off any of the paint on the rear bumper once all of the stripes are masked off later. After applying the first coat, I let it sit and dry for about 10 minutes, then applied a second coat, let that sit and dry for 10 minutes, and finally sprayed a third coat before letting it sit for about half an hour, and then starting to sand it down with some 3000 grit sanding sponges just to make it a lot smoother and remove any potential dust spots or rough spots in the primer and make it as clean as I can for the paint to go on top of it. So I asked you guys in the community section of YouTube which color I should go for and which stripes I should be painting on as well. One of those really spoke to me, which was orange and a gunmetal. So I decided just to switch it up a little bit and go with a pearl orange and of course a gray pearl as well. So firstly I'm going to start off by painting all the areas for the stripes that need to be painted orange, as that is the lightest color, and in that case I'm painting that first, as that is a lot easier to do now and get coverage now than on top of a gray base color. In order to get full coverage on the orange, I had to paint about 4 to 5 layers. I'm not going to be boring you with that, I just let it sit and dry in between for about 10 minutes, and then afterwards, since I'm applying so many layers, I want to make sure that it's properly dried. I let it sit overnight before I started masking off the stripes. The next day I could move on to masking off the stripes. I started out by putting some tape on the top and bottom, measuring and marking out the center, and then cutting out a piece of 2mm wide masking tape for that center stripe to be laid down. Measured it again and could then remove all of my markers and move on to the actual stripes themselves. With both stripes now laid down, I could remove that center marker and move on to the rest of the body in the same technique as I did here. So initially I had decided to go with gunmetal. I sprayed down a couple of layers, firstly of those hard to reach, easy to forget spots, and then the rest of the body itself, of course, as well. Now after about 2 to 3 coats, I started noticing that the color was not covering really well at all, and in the end I would have needed to be spraying about 10 coats to get full coverage. Now that's not really good for the paint buildup around all of the stripes and the masking, and also the paint buildup on the rest of the body, as that is a really big amount of coats. So after 2 to 3 coats, I decided to stop with the gunmetal and switch over to a pepper gray. This is the color used on the Gone in 60 Seconds movie car, the Eleanor. It's a bit of a lighter gunmetal, and the flake in it is a bit heavier, so it looks a bit more in your face, I would say. I didn't bother filming it, as it's pretty much the same technique as you see me do here, just a lighter shade. So once 2 more coats of the Eleanor Pepper Gray were applied, I could then let it dry for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then start carefully peeling off all of the masking tape, revealing the stripes. Now with the custom color scheme, I decided that it would be good to just continue that custom theme and add a couple of custom carbon fiber decals here and there. So I decided to go for the underside of the spoiler, also that small lip on the top side of the spoiler, the center part in the trunk, and also the splitter on the front bumper. So as usual, I start off with making some templates, putting some tape on the parts and tracing the outline of the shape I want it to be. Then remove that tape, transfer it to the carbon fiber decals. In this case, I'm using the ones from Scale Production. Cut the decals out, remove the tape, put them in some water, apply some decal setting solution, and start forming the decals to the parts themselves. After properly heating all of the decals, making sure they were dry and letting them sit for a couple of hours, I moved on to mixing some clear coat, starting on those hard to reach, easy to forget spots, and going over all of the stripes and decals with a first light coat, just to build it up on those areas and to make the transition between the colors and the decals a bit more even on the next couple of coats. I let this first initial coat sit for about 5 minutes and then moved on to a thicker and heavier coat on the entire body. With the first coat now applied, it's looking nice and smooth already, so about 5 minutes of curing time, I moved on to the second and final coat, applying that really heavily as well, just to make it as smooth as I could. And that's pretty much it for this one. I let it sit and dry for 2 to 3 days before moving on to the next stages on the body, and in the meantime I'm of course going to move on to the chassis and interior. Now the color combination might not be for everyone. I think it's really cool, even though that the metal flake in the pepper gray is a bit on the heavy and thick side. I do still like it, as it has a really custom and popping look to it, and it suits with the orange stripes in my opinion, as it's pretty much in your face already anyway. Now, of course, be sure to leave your uncensored opinions in the comment section below, as I'm really curious to know what you guys think of it.